Pause your current activity for a necessary and profound moment of self-reflection. Breathe deeply, and with unblinking honesty, cast your gaze upon the persistent, subtle state of imbalance that defines a significant portion of your existence. Welcome to a necessary confrontation, a space where the comforting illusions of superficial contentment are abandoned and the persistent gloom is challenged by the illuminating power of unvarnished truth. This message is not a palliative. It is not meant to lull you into a false sense of security or offer easy emotional solace. Instead, consider this a profound call to heightened spiritual awareness, a declaration of urgency against a hidden enemy. You may well be experiencing an invasion, a relentless, silent spiritual encroachment. The most terrifying aspect of this spiritual warfare is its absolute stealth. The entity we call an obsessor does not engage in dramatic visible attacks or public spectacle. Its preferred theater of operation is the quiet, sacred space of your own mind. It confuses, it twists perception, and it meticulously plants seeds of doubt, despair, and self-destruction in the fertile soil of your consciousness. If the narrative of your life has become a frustrating cycle of toxic thoughts, inexplicably poor judgments, and a profound bone-deep fatigue that no medical science can fully rationalize, then your immortal soul is issuing a desperate, silent plea for rescue. You are likely facing more than a simple psychological low or a prolonged streak of misfortune. You are, in all probability, operating under a deliberate, focused, and malevolent influence. Before we proceed further into the details of this confrontation, I offer you a challenge, a profound act of self-affirmation and spiritual defiance. In the comments section, I urge you to write, with full conviction and deliberate sincerity, "My inner light is greater than this pain." This is not a mere emotional venting or an empty slogan. It is a sacred covenant of self-defense, a powerful, conscious declaration that you unequivocally refuse the role of the invisible victim. When uttered with true intent, this phrase resonates powerfully across the invisible planes of existence, serving as a beacon of your resolve. Understand that the content you are about to absorb is not entertainment. It is a comprehensive spiritual emergency broadcast, a profound warning that holds the potential to reclaim your sanity, restore your purpose, and re-establish your dominion over your own being. That recurring heavy sensation of being perpetually dragged down, of a force actively undermining and dismantling your hopes and aspirations without any tangible, logical cause, is not always attributable to purely psychological factors. In a vast majority of cases recognized by spiritual science, the root cause is deeply spiritual. The eminent scholars who dedicated their lives to the profound study of the soul and the unseen architecture of the universe, notably those inspired by the work of Allan Kardec, issued a solemn, perpetual warning. Where intense, prolonged, and disproportionate suffering manifests without any clear, visible, or material cause, there is a very high probability of unseen, detrimental interference. This journey is not about capitulating to fear of the invisible. It is about cultivating the crucial clarity required to recognize that you are, in fact, engaged in a continuous spiritual conflict. There are countless entities, intelligences, temporarily bound to the lower states of spiritual evolution, driven by unquenched vengeance, deep-seated pain, and corrosive revolt, who attach themselves to vulnerable human beings through the simple mechanism of affinity. They create a relentless current of profound misery that operates under a sophisticated, nearly perfect disguise. Their influence subtly manifests as unshakable, chronic sorrow, terrifying destructive urges, a volatile emotional imbalance that often leads observers to question your sanity, and even resistant physical ailments that defy conventional medical diagnosis. The initial paramount step toward securing your absolute freedom is to cease the harmful pretense that everything is acceptable and to acknowledge, with sincere humility and courage, that the problem you are facing transcends the superficial realm of the physical, material world. We are now prepared to systematically unmask the most telling and perilous indicators of this parasitic spiritual presence. The profound insights you are about to assimilate will fundamentally transform the way you perceive, interpret, and resolve every single conflict you encounter. I implore you to remain fully engaged until the very end, for the true turning point in this crucial narrative is the precise moment when the potential to fully reclaim sovereignty over your life is presented to you, armed with the knowledge of the mechanisms of obsession as documented by the great pioneers of spiritual understanding. The core tenets of the Spiritist doctrine, laid bare by Allan Kardec in foundational texts like The Spirit's Book and The Gospel According to Spiritism, establish that the universe is governed by an unyielding law of affinity, which serves as the precise mechanism through which spiritual interaction occurs. An obsessing spirit, a lower intelligence, does not and cannot enter your life arbitrarily or through some mystical, forced intrusion. They do not require a dramatic, formal invocation or ritualistic permission to begin their destructive work. Instead, they exploit the pre-existing, emotionally volatile terrain of your inner life. This parasitic relationship finds its initial, most crucial foothold in your unresolved emotional breaches. The persistent guilt you refuse to acknowledge and address, the deep-seated grievances and ancient grudges you meticulously nourish year after year, and the toxic, cultivated anger that you keep hidden like a poisonous secret garden. This is the exact point where the vibrational tuning occurs. In the precise language of Spiritism, this is where the sympathy is established, creating the energetic current that holds you captive, a voice of fundamental authority in the study of obsession, drawing from Kardec's own revelations, articulated an irrefutable hard truth. Obsession does not commence with the other external entity, but it commences within ourselves. This profound statement acts as a powerful intellectual shock to any tendency toward passive victimhood. For a spiritually diseased, suffering entity to successfully approach and establish a sustainable link, your own emotional essence must be oscillating at a comparable frequency to its distress, a perverse, morbid affinity stemming from deep, unhealed inner wounds. The obsessing entity is, in the majority of cases, not motivated by a desire for your physical demise. Its primary consuming objective is far more psychological and spiritual. It desperately seeks to force you to feel the identical despair, the identical sense of abandonment, the identical corrosive, poisoned rage that constitutes its own perpetual torment. The spirit effectively injects its own personal dramas, its own narrative of suffering and failure, directly into the intricate workings of your mind, thereby transforming your own conscious thoughts into instruments for the perpetuation of its suffering. Have you experienced periods where your actions felt totally foreign, moments when you looked in the mirror and failed to recognize the person staring back? Have you been prone to disproportionate, explosive fits of unwarranted fury, or made major life decisions that appear, in retrospect, to have been designed for self-sabotage, or felt frightening, dangerous impulses that possess a distinct feeling of being non-native to your true character? If so, the explanation is not simply a personal failing. It is the signature of a spiritual parasite meticulously exploiting your moments of vulnerability. The obsessing spirit operates with the subtle methodology of water damage or hidden infiltration. It never violently forces the door down. It expertly, patiently, and quietly slips through the smallest unsealed crack. The more you permit the accumulation of mental debris, emotional clutter, and negative self-talk, the wider this crucial crevice expands, and the more all-encompassing and devastating the spiritual invasion becomes. It is, therefore, a matter of paramount, urgent necessity that you begin immediately to treat the sanctuary of your mind as if it were the ultimate fortress of your spiritual and material survival. This disciplined mental hygiene is the initial, absolute defensive posture prescribed by the highest levels of spiritual wisdom. One of the most clear-cut, persistent, and often dangerously dismissed indications of spiritual influence is the phenomenon of unrelenting, inexplicable fatigue, which the Spiritist doctrine identifies as a systematic draining of the vital fluid. This exhaustion is not merely a common consequence of a busy life or a consequence of inadequate sleep. It is the fundamental sensation of being spiritually and energetically siphoned, of having one's essential vital force systematically stolen during the quiet hours of the night. The first and most undeniable signal is the combination of persistent insomnia and a profoundly crushing feeling upon waking. This experience transcends a simple night of poor sleep. It is the sensation of an active, draining process occurring in the deep hours, resulting in your waking state being more utterly exhausted than the moment you initially lay down. Your vital energy, is not simply resting. It is being actively plundered, leaving you with an existential emptiness, as though a key component of your life force has been maliciously rerouted or extracted. The obsessing entity feeds on the high-quality energy generated by human thought and emotion, preferring the low, dense frequencies of fear, anger, and especially the deep, passive resignation of discouragement. The second component is the sudden, terrifying, and utterly inexplicable collapse of your essential vitality and life momentum. You may have been a person of energy, driven by ambition, clear goals, and formidable personal strength, only to find yourself, without any concurrent physical diagnosis, experiencing a profound, paralyzing loss of the will to live, to resist, to plan, or to engage in any form of struggle. This overwhelming spiritual inertia, this deep-seated lack of motivation and persistent disanimo is not a mere psychological phase. It is, in reality, an active, deliberate energy siphoning. The obsessing spirit functions as an invisible leech, persistently sucking your moral and physical strength, creating an environment of emotional and spiritual vulnerability that is conducive to its continued presence. This weight, this pervasive, crushing burden that you carry throughout your day, which lacks any concrete visible origin, is not simply the consequence of contemporary pressures. It is the spiritual equivalent of an invisible cable, relentlessly pulling your soul backward, strategically blocking any attempt you make to progress, evolve, or achieve spiritual elevation. Recognizing the spiritual origin of this deep, resistant fatigue is the crucial step toward breaking the cycle. You must understand that you're not simply tired. You're under a strategic spiritual siege designed to keep your consciousness at a low, passive frequency, a state where the influence can be maintained with minimum effort from the influencing entity. The most direct and frightening method of the spiritual invasion lies in the deliberate, systematic planting of thoughts that are alien to your true character and purpose. This constitutes the third profound signal of unwelcome spiritual presence. This is not simply about having bad days or natural mood swings. It involves the aggressive and frequent invasion of what are termed somber thoughts, intrusive, dark mental constructs that are not organically generated by your own conscience. These can manifest as powerful, recurring ideas of outright surrender, impulses toward self-destruction, sudden and disproportionate flares of aggressive or violent rage, or that cold, unsettling inner voice that subtly encourages you to take steps that are demonstrably self-harming or reckless. The fundamental truth, as revealed through profound spiritual investigation, is that these thoughts are often not truly yours. They are whispers planted in your mental field. You are faced with the profound necessity of accurately identifying the spiritual intruder. The obsessing spirit, being an intelligence trapped in its own misery, projects its own dark mental and emotional substance onto your receptive mind. The mechanism relies on suggestion. The entity suggests the thought, and the vulnerable human mind, already weakened by affinity, accepts and acts upon it as if it were an original, organic idea. The impact is devastating. It leads to a catastrophic loss of emotional equilibrium and a pattern of destructive impulsivity. These are the reactions that even you cannot fully comprehend. The fits of rage that cause irreparable harm to relationships, the financial or professional decisions that seem meticulously designed for failure, the sheer self-sabotage. The obsessing entity delights in chaos, and by provoking these extreme erratic reactions, it ensures that your life remains in perpetual discord, a state that lowers your spiritual shield and facilitates further manipulation. This entire process is a strategic effort to undermine your self-trust, to convince you that you are inherently flawed or hopelessly irrational, thereby cementing its control through your own self-condemnation. The core teaching here is vigilance. You must learn to question the origin of every intensely negative or destructive thought. The moment you consciously identify the thought as an intrusion, its power to affect your emotional state is immediately diminished. This is the first essential step in spiritual mental hygiene, actively filtering the thoughts that enter your conscious awareness and rejecting those that are clearly born of malice, despair, or self-harm. The obsessing influence is strategically adept at targeting the very foundation of your emotional and spiritual security, the home and family unit. The fifth signal is the sudden, inexplicable, and disproportionate intensification of familial conflict. The parasitic entity is deeply attracted to the corrosive energy of chaos and discord. Its method is to skillfully sow seeds of disagreement where peace and harmony once prevailed, meticulously blowing on the embers of minor grievances and exploiting long-forgotten misunderstandings. It covertly fuels gossip, exacerbates trivial arguments, and amplifies minor irritations into significant relationship-threatening battles. The entire purpose of this orchestrated domestic turmoil is to maintain a perpetually heavy, discordant, and low-frequency atmosphere, an energetic environment where the pure light of benevolent spiritual influence is actively prevented from penetrating and establishing residence. The home, which should naturally function as a sanctuary and a temple of peace, is systematically converted into a breeding ground for negative energy. In the wisdom of the Spiritist doctrine, the family unit is understood as a profound karmic and spiritual crucible where spirits are reunited not by chance, but by the necessity of shared evolution and resolution of past life issues. When obsession targets this fundamental unit, it is a strategic maneuver designed to block the entire group's evolutionary progress. The entity understands that a person isolated and perpetually stressed by conflict is profoundly easier to control than one sustained by the cohesive love and support of a peaceful family. These seemingly minor, escalating arguments over inconsequential matters are, in reality, the subtle maneuvers of the spirit, seeking to keep the collective vibration of the household low and reactive. The entity acts as a malicious conductor of negative emotional energy, making everyone within the dwelling acutely sensitive and highly reactive to the slightest provocation. To counteract this, the spiritual antidote is the cultivation of a conscious, deliberate, and sustained peace. This is not passive avoidance of conflict. It is the active, resolute choice to respond to provocation with calmness, to speak words of understanding rather than judgment, and to transform the energy of the home through intentional acts of kindness and spiritual focus. This defensive action is a collective, powerful shield against the unseen forces of discord, protecting not just the individual, but the entire family from spiritual assault. The seventh and most potentially dangerous signal of deep-seated obsession is its ability to manifest a disguise within the physical body itself. This is the phenomenon of illnesses that evade clear diagnosis, chronic pain syndromes that defy all known conventional treatments, and a general state of unexplained, debilitating discomfort that is stubbornly persistent. This is not a matter of psychosomatic illness, but a genuine physical manifestation of profound spiritual energy imbalance. The obsessing influence, through its persistent draining and the injection of low-frequency emotional energy, disrupts the delicate balance of the perispirit, the fluid, semi-material body that serves as the energetic bridge between the immortal spirit and the physical material body. When the perispirit is subjected to prolonged negative influence, its energetic integrity is compromised. This compromise then translates directly into the material realm, affecting the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the overall cellular vitality, resulting in real, tangible physical symptoms. The obsessor, often being a spirit itself, trapped by its own unhealed physical ailments or trauma, unconsciously projects its own pain and suffering onto the vulnerable human medium. The result is a pattern of suffering that puzzles doctors: persistent migraines, chronic fatigue, widespread muscle and joint pain, fibromyalgia-like symptoms, or gastrointestinal disturbances that resist all traditional therapeutic interventions. It is a critical lesson that you must never ignore the invisible, spiritual dimension of causes behind physical suffering that refuses to yield to material remedies. This is the moment when spiritual investigation becomes absolutely necessary, side by side with conventional medical care. Understanding the spiritual root of the affliction is the first step toward true, holistic healing. The physical body is not merely matter. It is a highly sensitive energetic field, and the obsessing entity, through its tenacious hold, is literally creating a spiritual lesion that manifests materially. The spiritual remedy in these cases involves not just prayer but profound inner transformation, which helps to repair the perispiritual damage and restore the energetic balance of the entire being, thereby removing the fertile ground for the spiritual entity's continued physical manifestation. If the presence of an invasive spiritual influence has been clearly identified in your life, Your response must be an immediate, highly strategic, and spiritually assertive counter-maneuver. The most potent and readily accessible weapon in this arsenal, as taught by the Spiritist masters, is the act of sincere prayer. Sincere prayer is not an empty, formulaic ritual designed to magically banish an enemy. Its true, deep purpose is to profoundly and decisively elevate your personal vibrational frequency. The moment your essential energy field begins to change, rising toward the purity of genuine faith and love, the dense, low-vibrating, influencing spirit finds itself incapable of maintaining its oppressive connection. The higher, purer vibration acts as an energetic fire, a purifying light that consumes the shadows and repels the lower density of the obsessing entity. The Spiritist doctrine clearly states that inner tranquility is the ultimate superior defense against any form of evil or negative influence. And this tranquility is not an inherited trait. It is achieved through your persistent, conscious effort to improve yourself daily, an act of determined self-reformation regardless of temporary setbacks. The key to effective prayer is intention and sincerity. It does not need to be eloquent or verbose. A deep, honest plea, a heartfelt connection to the benevolent spiritual forces is far more powerful than any rote recitation. When you pray with sincere emotion, you are consciously reaching out to the higher spiritual plane, inviting benevolent spirits, those dedicated to light, love, and elevation, to draw near and shield you. This spiritual assistance acts as a ballistic, impenetrable shield. It does not confront the entity directly, but it fundamentally transforms the environment around you, making it utterly inhospitable to the lower entity's presence. The act of prayer is, fundamentally, an act of sovereignty. It is the conscious declaration that you choose the light, that you refuse to align with the negative frequencies, and that you are actively utilizing your free will to attract higher, positive influences into your life. This change in energetic alignment is the single most powerful deterrent to any obsessing spiritual force. The final, absolute key to severing the deepest and most tenacious bonds of spiritual obsession lies in the radical, unconditional practice of forgiveness. The teachings of the Spiritist doctrine emphasize that most deep, persistent obsessions are rooted in unresolved, painful conflicts and deep resentment carried across multiple past lives. When you stubbornly refuse to forgive, you enter a state of emotional and spiritual stagnation, and the obsessing entity, often a spirit with whom you have a profound, painful past connection, immediately anchors itself to this crucial, bleeding point of your soul. The obsessing spirit, being itself a prisoner of its own past traumas, vengeful feelings, and profound suffering, meticulously and endlessly replays painful, traumatic memories in your mind, skillfully working to ensure that the ancient wound remains perpetually open and festering. By initiating the courageous, profound act of forgiveness, you are not performing an act of charity toward the individual who wronged you. You are, in the highest sense, decisively breaking the spiritual tie, the chain that has held two spirits, the obsessing and the obsessed, together in a reciprocal bond of intense pain. The underlying truth is that obsession functions as a painful chain that can only sustain itself when both spirits are, in a fundamental sense, victims of a shared past. The moment you declare your inner spiritual freedom through the sincere act of forgiveness, that debilitating chain is absolutely and permanently cut. Forgiveness, in this spiritual context, is not a naive act of forgetting the past. It is the act of remembering the past event without allowing that memory to cause the current spiritual bleeding and suffering. It requires the immense moral and spiritual courage to look upon a past injury with sincere spiritual compassion. In doing this, you perform a great act of self-liberation, but you also often unconsciously begin the process of unimprisoning the very spirit that remains deeply trapped in the spiritual and emotional wreckage of your ancient grievances and profound historical resentments. This act is the highest form of spiritual love and self-defense, a complete and fundamental refusal to participate any further in the cycle of pain that sustains the obsession. Decades of profound spiritual wisdom, particularly that systematized by Allan Kardec, have consistently advocated for the conscientious practice of cultivating a sanctuary in your dwelling place through the regular, sincere practice of what is often called the gospel in the home, or more universally dedicated reading of spiritually elevating literature. This simple, profound practice, when conducted with sincerity and respect, achieves far more than just cleaning the ambient atmosphere. It meticulously adjusts the personal and collective vibrations of the entire household. This act consciously invites the presence of benevolent, high-vibrating spirits, the spiritual friends and helpers, and actively repels those lower, dense presences that are fundamentally incapable of enduring the purity of light and sincere spiritual effort. The greatest movements of authentic spirituality are often found in the brutal simplicity of a sincere, honest prayer, a tear of genuine repentance, or a deeply felt petition that emanates from the profound depths of the soul. Those who have dedicated their lives to the front lines of spiritual assistance have issued a clear, consistent warning. Inferior spirits simply do not invade or establish themselves where the principles of a righteous, high-vibrational life are sincerely put into practice. If you sense the persistent, debilitating influence of obsession, you must immediately begin to manage the entirety of your emotional and environmental routine with ruthless dedication. This means deliberately avoiding heavy, draining environments, minimizing excessive exposure to destructive news cycles, and especially fleeing from conversations that are saturated with corrosive judgment, cynical criticism, and trivial gossip. All of these external toxins act as potent spiritual poison, critically lowering your personal frequency and serving as wide-open portals for any form of unwelcome spiritual approximation. Conversely, the creative arts, especially music and song, function as a powerful spiritual weapon for healing and elevation. Consciously listen to and sing music that genuinely touches your soul and elevates your mood. Sincere, pure art constructs a powerful, invisible, and highly effective sonic barrier, as the obsessing entities prefer the cacophony of chaos, the heat of rage, and profound emotional disharmony. The profound, serene silence of inner and outer peace is, for them, a potent and uncomfortable repellent, the most unyielding and comprehensive shield you can ever forge against any form of spiritual influence is the profound commitment to selfless work in the sphere of goodness and active service to others. When you consciously place yourself in a position of humble service to your neighbor, you immediately and automatically connect your entire being to the highest, most powerful spiritual currents of assistance and love. The forces of spiritual obsession simply cannot find any sustainable shelter in a heart that is fully preoccupied and genuinely engaged in serving the needs of others. Pure, simple, and unassuming charity, the active love of one's neighbor, has the immediate, profound power to utterly disintegrate any form of invisible spiritual offensive. You must not, under any circumstances, allow yourself to fear the obsessing spirit. It is not an all-powerful, invincible demon. It is, at its core, an ignorant, suffering spiritual being. Uncontrolled, paralyzing fear is the very oxygen that sustains its power and fuels its influence. Conversely, the steady, reliable light of spiritual knowledge, the determined consistency of sincere prayer, and the unwavering discipline of emotional equilibrium, these are the powerful, spiritual-grade shields that will systematically dismantle every single attempt at spiritual domination. The very structure of your thoughts forms invisible, tangible constructs. As revealed by the Spiritist doctrine, thoughts possess inherent weight, color, and specific form. Obsessing entities are immediately drawn to dark, chaotic thoughts, attaching to them like flies to a wound. If your mind is allowed to remain in a state of perpetual darkness, they will effortlessly find a secure shelter. However, if your mind is actively maintained to shine brightly with the pure light of faith, compassion, and unwavering purpose, they will find the resulting intense spiritual illumination unbearable and will be forced to retreat. The core of this defense rests on profound mental hygiene. Consciously reject thoughts of cynicism, despair, and malice. Engage your mind in productive, constructive, and morally uplifting reflection. This conscious management of your inner world transforms your entire being into a spiritual beacon, a powerful self-sustaining source of light that actively repels the shadows. The profound teachings of the Spiritist doctrine, particularly concerning the mechanism of reincarnation and the law of cause and effect, karma, provide the deepest, most comprehensive explanation for the tenacity and complexity of many obsessions. From this perspective, A significant portion of spiritual obsession is not a random attack, but rather a pending cycle, a painful, unresolved drama involving two or more spirits, carried over from one or multiple past existences. The obsessing spirit is often a former acquaintance, a victim or a spiritual antagonist from a prior life, seeking a form of deeply misguided spiritual vengeance, or simply remaining attached due to shared suffering and unresolved debt. The profound revelation here is that the only truly effective permanent way to definitively break this ancient, painful cycle is not through ritualistic banishment or magical spell, but through the consistent application of pure, transformative love, selfless service, and a genuine, deeply felt inner repentance for the past errors that created the debt. The very presence of the Christic ideal, the consciousness of Jesus, functions as an eternal, unwavering spiritual lighthouse. His vibration of pure, unadulterated love is entirely unreachable by any obsessing entity. The spiritual experience accumulated over decades consistently clarifies that even the most prepared and dedicated spiritual workers require a strong support network. One of the central pillars of the Spiritist study teaches that the home is the first temple. It is an imperative necessity to harmonize your living environment through sincere, consistent prayer and the regular, edifying reading of profound moral and spiritual texts. The wisdom of those who could perceive the invisible realms consistently reminds us that while yesterday may have been exceptionally difficult, the entire reality of tomorrow is meticulously constructed by the sincere choices we make today. Your past life errors, your current vulnerabilities, and your accumulated guilt do not, and absolutely cannot, define your ultimate spiritual future. Every single day that dawns is a new, wide-open door, and your profound spiritual liberation begins with the very choice you make this moment. The choice to consciously love more, to judge far less, to forgive without any reservation, and to stubbornly insist on doing good, even and especially when the dark, malevolent inner voice whispers the counsel of utter defeat and spiritual surrender. Obsession can only achieve victory where there is passive stagnation and a willful resignation to prolonged suffering. Therefore, the absolute necessity is to persevere, to insist, to be tenacious in your spiritual commitment. You have now reached the absolute end of this intense, profound, and urgently necessary spiritual journey. If you have remained fully engaged until this final moment, it is definitive proof that your soul is currently aflame, profoundly thirsty for absolute freedom, and possesses the necessary courage to directly confront the darkness that once dared to establish itself within your sacred inner life. You have been comprehensively exposed to the most unvarnished core truth concerning the phenomenon of spiritual obsession. It is not a divine punishment, nor is it a random, external curse. Rather, it is the direct and painful manifestation of your own current spiritual disequilibrium and the accumulation of your long-standing, untreated emotional and spiritual wounds, which together created an irresistible field of attraction for lower frequency entities. The determined urgency and the directness of the tone used throughout this discourse were not intended to generate passive fear or simple panic, but to powerfully shake you into the acute awareness that your spiritual life is a continuous, daily, and often fierce struggle, a battle you may have previously been fighting while spiritually blindfolded. Now those bindings have been decisively cast aside. The central, unyielding lesson we have internalized is that spiritual liberation cannot be simply purchased with money, nor can it be achieved through an isolated, single ritual. It is exclusively and enduringly won through an implacable daily process of profound inner reform, an honest, persistent, and determined change in your moral and emotional character. It is realized in the quiet, absolute silence of your most sincere prayer, in the unwavering spiritual firmness of your most challenging forgiveness, and in your relentless, stubborn insistence on consistently doing good, even when it is difficult. It is in these conscious, daily spiritual actions that the persistent shadow finally completely dissolves. You have clearly discovered that your own hard-won inner tranquility is your most reliable and impenetrable spiritual shield, and that maintaining a high, pure vibrational frequency is the power capable of consuming and incinerating every single dense negative influence that attempts to approach your spiritual space. You are not a defenseless victim waiting for rescue. You are an eternal sovereign spirit, profoundly endowed with an invincible divine spark, that no form of spiritual darkness possesses the power to extinguish. Moving forward from this very moment, we offer a message that transcends the immediate urgency of the spiritual battle, a message of pure, unconditioned love and absolute, unshakable peace. You must comprehend and internalize the profound paradox. The obsessing spirit, in its deepest, most essential nature, is not an enemy to be hated or destroyed, but rather a suffering, profoundly ignorant spiritual sibling. These entities are trapped in their own severe pain and confusion precisely because they have not yet discovered or embraced the light that you are now actively seeking. Therefore, instead of merely fueling the emotional fire with rage or paralyzing fear, our highest act of spiritual defense and charity is to actively send pure, silent, heartfelt love toward the entity that seeks to pursue us. Imagine the powerful contradiction. The entity seeks your conflict and pain to sustain itself, and you, with a conscious act of radical compassion, completely disarm it. Hatred, vengeance, and darkness simply cannot survive or persist where silent, pure love is intentionally and consistently planted. Your ultimate spiritual victory will not be truly complete until you can look upon your deepest pain, and perhaps even conceptually upon the very spirit that seeks to obsess you, and send forth a wave of pure, powerful energy, an intention of healing, a sincere desire for that entity to finally find its own path toward the liberating light. This is not a sign of weakness or spiritual naivete. It is the purest, most elevated manifestation of the spiritual strength that exists in the entire universe, the single solitary force capable of truly breaking the ancient chains of hatred, vengeance, and suffering that have often extended across countless centuries and numerous reincarnations. Love, in this context, demands no spiritual diploma, no clean, unblemished spiritual history. It demands only the sincere, unyielding will to choose the higher path. When you genuinely choose to love, despite your current suffering, you are declaring, with absolute authority to the entire spiritual dimension, that you are finally ready to be fully healed, and in turn ready to become a powerful instrument of healing for others. The peace that we seek is not the simple absence of all problems. That is an infantile fantasy. True spiritual peace is the profound, unshakable firmness of your heart's purpose, in the very midst of the most violent spiritual or emotional tempest. It is your absolute capacity to breathe deeply and consciously before reacting, to pray sincerely before you judge, and to consciously choose silence before you retaliate. It is the absolute, unyielding conviction that, regardless of the chaos and storm outside, your sacred core connection with the highest good remains entirely unbreakable. No one possesses the ability to travel backward and construct a new, pristine beginning, but every single person has the power to commence anew from this very day forward. Your past mistakes, your deepest guilt, or your periods of vulnerability do not and cannot define the absolute majesty of your future. Each day that arrives is a newly granted spiritual door, and your ultimate spiritual liberation begins with the choice you make right now: to love relentlessly, to judge only your own errors, to forgive without any single reservation, and to stubbornly persist in doing good, even when the dark inner voice whispers the counsel of utter spiritual defeat. Obsession only triumphs where there is passive stagnation and a willful abandonment of the struggle. Therefore, you must persevere. Insist on the daily practice of spiritual elevation in your home. Insist on the determined consistency of sincere prayer. Insist on the proactive practice of charity, the healing power of light-hearted laughter, the profound liberation of radical forgiveness, and the absolute unrelenting vigilance over the sanctity of your own thoughts. The light within you must be actively cultivated and consciously nourished every single day until it finally becomes a permanent, self-sustaining, and unquenchable presence within your eternal being.